The Secrets of Mental Superiority. William Richard Latson. Introduction. My mind to me is a kingdom. Epictetus. The mind is the measure of man. Watts. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Jesus. Man does not contain mind. Mind contains man. Socrates. In the universe there is nothing great except man. In man there is nothing great except mind. Aristotle. In the brief articles which will compose this series, my aim will be to present in the briefest, simplest and most practical manner the methods which, in my experience and that of many others who have been more or less under my influence, have seemed to lead to greater mental efficiency. It is said that there is no royal road to learning, and while in a certain sense this is true, it is also true that in all things, even in the training of the mind, there is a right way and a wrong way, or rather, there is one right way, and there are 1,000 wrong ways. Now, after trying, it seems to me, most of the wrong ways, I have found what I believe to be the right way, and in these articles I shall try to lay it out for you. Do not expect an essay on psychology or a series of dissertations on the faculties of the mind, for there will be none of that. On the other hand, I will avoid, as much as possible, textbook terms and textbook tone, both of which are quite absurd and useless. I will try to give you the facts. I will try to give you clear instructions, stripped of all verbiage and pseudo-scientific frivolity, for the acquisition of mental activity and mental supremacy. Chapter 1. The Mind and its Matter. In the first place, before you are able to think at all, you must have something to think about. You must have some mental stock in trade, and this mental stock in trade can only be obtained through the senses. The appearance of a tree, the roar of the ocean, the smell of a rose, the taste of an orange, the sensation you experience when you touch a piece of satin, all this is material that helps to form your stock of mental images, the content of consciousness, as the scholastic psychologists call it. Now, all these millions and millions of facts that form our mental stock, the material of thought, are obtained through the senses, sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch, etc. Value of perceptions. In a recent article published in a leading French scientific journal, a well-known scientist, Dr. A. Perez, has put forward some ideas which agree so fully with my own observations, made over many years, that I yield to the temptation to quote them. Dr. Perez first of all points out the modern degeneration in this respect. I enclose a free translation of some extracts which seem to me particularly worthy of attention. Have we not more than arms and legs? Have we not also eyes and ears? And are not the latter organs necessary for the use of the former? Exercise, then, not only the muscles, but also the senses that control them. This is how a famous philosopher used to express himself. However, when we measure the sharpness of sight, we find that it weakens, the hardness of hearing increases. We suffer daily from the lack of skill of workmen, of domestics, of ourselves. As for taste and smell, they are exhausted. Thus act the inevitable laws of atavism. The trouble is that, in spite of Rousseau's objections, we have always paid too little attention to the hygiene and education of the senses, giving all our care to the development of physical strength and vigor, so that the general term, physical education, has finally assumed the restricted meaning of muscular education. The senses, which bring us into contact with external objects, are nevertheless of primary importance. So great is their value that it is man's interest and even duty to preserve them as a treasure and to do nothing that would upset their wonderful mechanism. The length and accuracy of the eye, the dexterity and sureness of the hand, the delicacy of the ear, are of value both to the artist and the craftsman because of the perfection and rapidity of the work which they ensure. Nothing embarrasses a man so trained. He is, so to speak, prepared for everything. His cultivated senses have become for him tools of universal use. The more perfect his sensations are, the more justice and clarity his ideas acquire. The education of the senses is the first form of intellectual education. The influence of the training of the senses is easy to see. The skilled marksman never misses his aim. The savage perceives and recognizes the slightest rustle. Certain blind men know colors by touch. The precision of jugglers is astonishing. The gourmet recognizes the quality of a wine among 1,000 others. Smell is for chemists one of the most sensitive reactions. The senses operate in two ways: passively, when the organ, by the mere fact of being situated on the surface of the body and independently of the will, is actuated by external bodies, or actively, when the organ, directed and excited by the will, goes, as it were, ahead of the body to receive the impression. Passively we see, we hear, we touch, we smell. Actively we observe, we listen, we feel, we smell. By the effect of attention, and by disposing our organs in certain ways, our impressions become more intense. The impressions which external objects produce on the sense organs, the nerves and the brain, are followed by certain mental operations. These two things are often confused. We are in the habit of saying that our senses often deceive us. It would be fairer to recognize that we do not always interpret correctly the data they give us. The art of interpretation can be learned. The intuitive and concrete form given today to education contributes to the training of the senses by developing attention, the habit of observation. But this is not enough. To perfect the senses, and to make each of them, in their own perceptions, acquire all possible strength and precision, it is necessary to subject them to special, appropriate, and graduated exercises. A new gymnastics must thus be created in all its details. There are, of course, a certain number of specific or racial impressions and tendencies which are transmitted through what is called heredity. But these are merely instincts and impulses, and although they have an influence upon the character and habits of thought of the person, they do not in themselves furnish real material for thought. Imagine a blind and deaf person who could not smell, taste, feel, or move. He would be totally unable to think because he would have nothing in his mind to think about. The material of thought, the mental stock in trade, is obtained through the senses, and in any rational effort to train the mind, we must begin by training the senses, the perceptions, as they are more accurately called, so that we can see, hear, smell, taste, and feel more accurately and acutely. Trained perceptions are the very basis of all mental power. Our system of training for mental supremacy will begin, then, with a brief study of the perceptions, or senses, and of the methods by which we may acquire the power to see more clearly, to hear more attentively, to feel more delicately, and, in general, to develop the perceptive powers. But perceptions are of little value unless we remember what we have perceived. You may have read all the wise books ever written. You may have traveled all over the world. You may have had all sorts of interesting and unusual experiences, but unless you can remember what you have read, what you have seen, and what you have done, you will have no real use for it all. You will have gained no mental capital, no material by the use of which you can hope to attain mental supremacy. It will be necessary, then, that we study not only the methods of developing the power of perception, but the means by which perception can be retained and remembered at will. The power of associating memories. But memory itself is not enough. I have known people with unusual powers of memory who could not speak, write, or think well, who were like the book-laden, ignorantly read imbecile with a lot of erudite humor in his head, but who, in spite of all their experience and their recollection of it, had nothing to write, nothing to say. So memory is not enough. One must have the power to unite memories, to analyze, compare, contrast, and associate them, until the whole mass of memories, which form the content of consciousness, is a splendid and homogeneous whole, a mass of images, each of which is intimately related to many others, and all of which are under the instantaneous command of the central sovereign, the will. It will be necessary, then, to pay special attention to this most important matter of analyzing, comparing, and grouping mental images. Of all the activities of the mind, this faculty, called the power of association, is the one which most directly leads to what is generally called a brilliant mind. Imagination and judgment, the possession of trained perceptions, of a retentive memory, and of great powers of association are of enormous value, but only when combined with another faculty, imagination. And imagination is nothing more than the power of recombining certain memories in such a way as to make the combination new. Imagination is a faculty of the greatest possible importance. Every splendid achievement, every invention, every commercial enterprise, every great poem, book, or picture has not only been conceived, but completed in the imagination before it became a reality, in fact. And then it is necessary to be able to compare mental images gathered by perceptions, recalled and classified by memory and association, in order to determine the relation of these memories to each other and their application to other ideas or mental images. And this valuable faculty of the mind is called judgment, necessity of concentration. Now, in order to do well any of the things of which I have been writing, it is necessary that the whole mind be occupied in that one thing. To do anything well, one must do only that one thing at that one moment, and this is particularly true of the action of the mind. The focusing of the whole power of the mind on one thing is commonly known as concentration, or the power of attention. So essential is this power of concentrating the whole mind on the task at hand that it is not too much to say that no great degree of mental power can be obtained without concentration. Therefore, in our study of the practical methods by which mental supremacy may be achieved, we shall give special attention to the development of this invaluable faculty. But to do anything with the mind, or with the body for that matter, one must choose, one must desire to do that thing. And this choice, this decision to do something, is called will. The power to choose quickly and decisively and to act energetically in accordance with that choice is something quite rare. He who has that power is said to have a strong will. This question of the will and its development is very important. The great difference between men, between strong men and weak men, between the honored and the despised, between masters and servants is the will. A man of strong and unwavering will is sure to succeed, even if his abilities are mediocre. But a man of weak will, no matter what his abilities, is not likely to achieve either success or honor among men. As a great psychologist has said, the education of the will is really of far greater importance than that of the intellect. And also, without this will, there can be neither independence, nor firmness, nor individuality of character. Marvel says, "Resolution is what makes a man manifest himself. Will makes giants of men." The will, like any other mental faculty, can be highly developed by training, and this, with many practical exercises, we shall also treat in its proper place. Importance of the social faculties. The foregoing brief description of the mental faculties embraces those which any person can develop and use without help or association with other people. However, the higher mental faculties, or at any rate the more impressive ones, can only be developed through contact with others, through social intercourse. A man may have miraculously acute perceptions, a perfect memory, a splendid imagination, unerring judgment, an indomitable will. He may have all these, and yet he would miss the rewards of mental supremacy unless he were able to deal with other people, unless he were socially realized. In our efforts to train the powers of the mind, therefore, it will be necessary to make a study of some of the principles which affect our relations with other people, and so in the same practical and direct way, we shall discuss sympathy, adaptability, and self-control. The important question of verbal expression, as applied to both speech and writing, will also receive special attention. Mental action as a unit. In conclusion, it should not be forgotten that, although I speak of the various mental acts as if they were separate, this is done only for convenience of discussion and description. In fact, the mind is one thing, a unity. All the various faculties are constantly acting together. One cannot remember what an oak tree looks like unless one has carefully observed an oak tree. He cannot imagine an oak tree unless he remembers it. He cannot judge the difference between an oak tree and a maple tree unless he can picture an image of the two side by side. And he cannot do any of these things without attention, nor can he concentrate his attention without an act of will. We see then that the various acts of the mind, perception, memory, imagination, judgment, attention, and will are inextricably interdependent, and that one act implies all the others. Fortunately, this makes our task easier and more interesting. In this series, I will begin by giving you some practical tips for developing the perceptual faculties, the ability to see, hear, feel, taste, and smell more effectively. But with each moment of practice like the one I am advising, you will also be developing a more accurate and acute memory, a finer and more expansive imagination, a greater concentration of power, and a stronger will. When we come to discuss the cultivation of willpower, the exercises will require the use of perceptions, memory, imagination, and other faculties. Thus, by developing the mind in any of the phases of its activity, one increases at the same time and by the same act the power and usefulness of the whole mind. Chapter 2. Training of the Perceptive Faculties. Man is the eyes of things. Hindu proverb. That clairvoyant genius, Goethe, once said that he regarded himself as the center of all phenomena, a sort of focus toward which everything in the universe converged, out of which he came Goethe. He also claimed that the true pattern of all things in life was simply the mass of sensations appreciable by the human senses. In other words, Goethe understood perfectly well the educational principle, now widely recognized and widely ignored, that all mental activity is based on perceptions, on the things we see, hear, feel, taste, and smell. We might as well try to build a house without wood, bricks, stone, or mortar, as we might try to think without a good stock of impressions, images, and memories gathered by the senses and perceptions. Blurred mental images. One of the never-failing marks of the common mind, the untrained and inefficient mind, is that the mental images it contains are fuzzy, blurred, inaccurate. A person with such a mind will tell you that a car just passed him on the road. Was it a big red car, you will ask him. Well, he doesn't quite know. It may have been red, but he thinks it was black. Possibly it was grey. How many people were in it? I think 3, 4, or 5. Ask him to give you a summary of a book he's read or a play he's seen, and he'll feel just as helpless, and so on and so forth. Such a person is the typical inefficient person. You will find thousands of such inefficients occupying unimportant positions in stores and offices, and even the trivial tasks of such positions they are incapable of performing properly. They cannot read a line of shorthand notes and be sure of their meaning. They cannot add up a column of figures and be sure of the result without repeated checks. Such wretches are the dregs of the commercial world, the unfit who, in the struggle for existence, must necessarily be displaced by those whose mental processes are more positive and accurate. It is almost unbelievable to what extent perceptions can develop. I personally know a bank teller who can detect a counterfeit coin without looking at it, judging only by weight, feel, and ring. Another man I know earns a large salary simply because of his ability to judge tea by its taste. A tea taster. I know a conductor who, in the full fortissimo of his 60-piece band, detects a slight error by any player. I could give many other examples from my own experience of remarkable powers of trained perception. Perceptions are easily trained. To encourage those who are aware that they do not get the best possible service from their senses and perceptions, that they do not see all there is to see, hear accurately and clearly, etc. For their benefit, I may say at once that senses and perceptions are easily trained. A month or two of such discipline as I am about to describe will show a very marked and gratifying development. In most cases, a few months' training is all that is needed, for the habit of close observation is soon formed, and once formed, no further thought is necessary. The matter resolves itself. Children's perceptions. First, a few words about the senses and perceptions of children. Here is one of the serious defects of our defective school system. It practically ignores the fact that the child develops not through reasoning, but through observation and activity. The child observes everything. His senses are active and acute. Childhood is the time to accumulate observations and experiences. Later, they will form the material for thinking and general development. The child must be encouraged to perceive and remember. All the methods I am about to describe are applicable to children under 10 years of age. The more elaborate and extensive the mass of perceptions, memories that the child carries over from infancy and childhood into youth and adulthood, the greater, all things being equal, will be his intellectual possibilities. Most of us are starved for senses. Most of us are very deficient in mental imagery. In a test conducted not long ago in Boston, 80% of the children had no idea what a beehive looked like, more than half had no idea of a sheep, and more than 9/10 had no idea of the appearance or nature of growing wheat. Of course, they knew other things that the country-bred child would not know, but imagine the loss in the imagination of one to whom the following lines arouse no vision of a pure and rustic morning scene. The call of the incense-breathing morning breeze, the twitter of the swallow from the thatched shed, the shrill bugle of the cock, or the echo of the horn will no longer rouse them from their humble bed. The great secret of a true development of perceptions is discrimination, the understanding of differences. To the savage, a sound is a sound. To the musician, it is an unbearable discord or an exquisite harmony. To the musician, a small depression in the ground, a bent branch, a crooked leaf, are nothing. To the savage, they mean food, an enemy, safety, or danger. On the printed pages, the unlettered rustic sees only silly black marks on white paper, but in those black marks, the educated man sees what makes his heart beat faster, his eyes water, what tells him secrets of life that the peasant will never know. The differences are in the trained or untrained perceptions. Most of the exercises I am about to describe are quite simple. Many, perhaps, seem trivial. But remember, as a great educator has said, the my point in education is the power of attending to things which may be in themselves indifferent by arousing an artificial feeling of interest. So the first exercise is simple enough. Simple, but not easy. Try it, and you will see. Take any object you want, a book, a pen, a pair of scissors. Place it on the table in front of you. Then take pencil and paper and describe it. Just tell what you see. Can you do it? I doubt it. Tell us its dimensions, its weight, its color, its shape, its markings, its lettering, its origin, its uses, its possibilities, its defects. See to what extent you can write on the object. It is likely that you will not like the result. You will discover that you have nowhere near the ability to express yourself that you supposed you possessed. But it is good training, and with practice your faculties will grow rapidly. You can do the same outdoors. Look at a mountain peak, the ocean, a horse, a bird. If you think for a moment that there is nothing to write about these things, read the poem in the Valley of Chamouni, the splendid passage in Byron that begins, "Roll deep, dark blue ocean, roll," the magnificent poem in the Book of Job describing the horse, Shelley's Skylark, and so on. James Whitcomb. Riley has said, "There's always a song in there somewhere, my child." And to find the material for the song, it is only necessary to look with a refined and educated perception, to look trying to see all the various sides, all the many phases of the object looked at. In the same way, one must also study many other natural objects, the autumn tints, the frost marks, the snowflakes, the trees, both their general shape and that of their leaves, all the common flowers. Finally, and in many ways most important in practice, get used to observing the human face closely. Try to recognize and discriminate the signs of education, refinement, intellect in the face, distinguishing them from the stigmata of ignorance, coarseness, and brutality. Another good exercise for eye training is the following. Get a number of ordinary marbles, say 3 dozen, 1 dozen of each, red, white, and blue. Mix them together in a container. Now get a handful of marbles, take a look at them, and throw them back. Then write down how many of each color were in your hand. At first you will find this difficult. In a short time, however, you will be able to distinguish at a glance between, say, 3 red, 5 white, and 7 blue, and 3 red, 6 white, and 6 blue, with a corresponding development of the faculties of perception in all other directions. A very simple and very good exercise for the development of the faculty of sight is as follows. Get a dozen white cardstock, about 3 inches by 5 inches in size. Then, with a small brush or pen, draw on each of them a series of small black circles. The circles should be solid black, approximately 1/4 inch in diameter. On the first card draw 1, on the second 2, and so on until the last, on which you will make 12. Group them together as much as possible, forming a circle. Now to use them, put the cards face down and shuffle. Then take the top one, take a brief look at it, and try to perceive how many black circles are on it. Do not try to count during your brief glance. Don't squint, frown, or strain your eyes. Just take a look and then try to remember and count what you saw. You may find it difficult at first to distinguish between 5 circles and 6. However, after a while, you will be able to instantly decide on any number of circles up to 15, 20, or even more. Train your ear to hear. Few people can hear. Of most, it might well be said that they hear and do not hear. I do not mean to say that in most people, the organ of hearing is defective in any way, but that as a result of inattention and lack of practice, they do not get clear and vivid impressions of the sounds impinging on their auditory apparatus. One of the best methods of training the auditory faculty is to listen attentively to the various sounds of the field: the buzzing of insects, the cry of the robin, the thrush, the catbird, the blackbird, the swallow. All these and many other sounds peculiar to the countryside should be carefully studied. The sounds peculiar to city life are less picturesque and, in a sense, less varied than those of the country. And yet, if we speak only of the musical advantages of the city, there alone we have material for splendid auditory training. Concerts, opera, social music, the phonograph, even the hand organs of the street offer opportunities for ear training. These opportunities can be taken advantage of in a number of ways. One of the best and most practical, perhaps, is to demand of us habitually a knowledge of the melody of popular selections. How many people, who are not musical, know the melody of the Soldier's Chorus from Faust, the Bullfighter's Song from Carmen, or the Overture to Tannhauser? And yet these are things we hear every day on street organs. A very good exercise for the development of the auditory faculty is simply to listen to the ticking of a clock. One method I have found very practical and useful is as follows. Place the clock on the table on which you are sitting. Now turn your left ear toward it. Do you hear it? Yes, clearly. Move 1 foot, 2 feet, 3, 4 away from the table. Can you hear the clock? Yes. Now increase the distance foot by foot until you can no longer hear the clock. Now listen. Listen. Concentrate your attention on the sound until, out of the silence or out of a confusion of sounds, the clear rhythmic ticking of the little mechanism comes to you. All this time, you will be sitting with your left ear turned towards the watch. The same practice should be done, of course, with the right ear. This exercise is valuable not only for cultivating the power of hearing, but also for developing concentration of attention and will. It is simply another phase of the same method by which a conductor may, at will, select one instrument from a band and listen only to that one, to the exclusion of any other piece. Training the sense of smell. We often hear it said that, as an animal, man is inferior to the beasts of the field. But like many other things we hear, it is not true, at least not to any extent. The truth is that simply as an animal, man is the masterpiece of creation. In actual strength, endurance, grace, and speed of movement, the best physical types of men compare favorably with any other animal of the same size and weight. This is a biological fact, but in one respect at least, it is clearly inferior, and that is in regard to the sense of smell. There are very few animals that are not better equipped than man in this respect. For this inferiority there are many reasons, which we cannot discuss in this place. I may point out, however, that in some people the sense of smell is developed to a surprising degree. I once knew a woman, well-born and highly educated, who, blindfolded, could name any of her friends who came within 3 feet of her. The same woman was also able to determine by scent the owner of items belonging to those she knew well. I know another woman who can distinguish copper, brass, steel and iron by their taste and smell. I may add that what we call taste is also largely smell. The achievements of tea, coffee, tobacco and whiskey experts depend to a great extent on the delicacy of the sense of smell. A good method for training this sense is as follows. Get several little cardboard or wooden boxes, such as those used by pharmacists for dispensing pills or tablets. Any drugstore will provide them for little money. Then put in each box a small amount of one of the following substances: cinnamon, cloves, red pepper, mustard, black pepper, ginger. Suffice it to half a dozen boxes, selecting for them the above substances that are most readily available. To practice this method, it is enough to close your eyes, open a box at random, and try to determine which substance it is by smell. This method can be varied by having several small jars, each containing one of the fragrant oils, such as clove oil, wintergreen, lemon, verbena, lavender, peppermint, bergamot, nutmeg, and so on. It is also a good plan to take careful note of the distinctive odor of the various fragrant flowers so that they can later be recognized by the perfume that is peculiar to each one. Taste training. There are really only 4 tastes: sweet, sour, bitter, bitter, and salty. As I have just pointed out, what we call taste is largely smell or flavor. The best way to develop the delicacy of the sense of taste is to eat very simple foods and put very little or no seasoning on them in the form of salt, sugar, mustard, pepper, vinegar, or other condiment. Then, and only then, will one be able to appreciate the true taste of the food. No one, for example, who is in the habit of using pepper and other seasonings can really taste a strawberry. In conclusion, I want to emphasize 2 things. First, that a training of the perceptive faculties is the best possible investment one can make, even considering the matter from its lowest point of view, the monetary. Secondly, that the exercises I have suggested in this chapter, although they may seem very simple, almost trivial, in all cases where they are seriously practiced, add immensely not only to the powers of perception, but to the practical efficiency of all the faculties of the mind. Chapter 3. Memory and How to Develop It. Memory is the accumulated genius. James Russell Lowell. Memory is the permanence of perception. Latson. The value of any man to himself and to the world at large depends largely upon his memory, upon his ability to recall and utilize at any desired time the memory of what he has seen, heard, experienced, or thought. Memory is really the basis of our mental life. Our perceptions bring us a vast mass of experiences, things we have seen, heard, touched, tasted, and smelled, our thoughts and experiences. But these things are only valuable when they are retained in memory. If they are not remembered, they cannot be used. Most of us have forgotten much more than we remember. We have studied in school, in college, at home. We have read many books. We have had many interesting and enlightening conversations. Some of us have traveled and seen many strange and curious things. And of all this, how much do we possess at this moment? How much do we have within our reach? Not a tenth, probably not even 100th part. Imagine the enormous loss it would mean for us. Imagine the loss of time and effort. Imagine what it would mean to you or to me if, instead of possessing a memory that preserved for us only 100th part of our experiences, we could recall and apply at will half, 3/4, 4/5 of what we have lived through. But that is impossible, you will say. Allow me to contradict you. There have been many cases of remembrance power that prove the contrary. The most striking was that of Antonio Magliabechi, who lived in Italy in the 17th century. From being a mere servant, he rose to become the librarian of Cosmo III, the Grand Duke of Turin. Magliabechi's memory was prodigious. Nothing he had seen, heard, or experienced escaped him. It is said that after a reading, he could repeat verbatim any book in his patron's library, which at the time possessed one of the greatest collections of the time. Impossible, you will say. Not at all. I know a man who can neither read nor write except to sign his name. He is an Irishman who began his life in this country with a pick and shovel. Today he is a rich and powerful man, financially and politically. He is a contractor, a real estate operator, a stock speculator, and is interested in other lines of business. He keeps no books and employs no accountants. All his values, dates, and figures are in his head, and at any time he can tell exactly where he stands with any of his partners. Among the ancient Greeks, it was not uncommon to find a learned patrician capable of reciting verbatim the complete poems of Homer, the Iliad, and the Odyssey. Cyrus the Great could call by name any man in his army, which numbered 1,000,000 soldiers. Napoleon had almost equally remarkable powers of memory. Gladstone, when presenting to Parliament his annual budget, would talk for several hours, presenting monetary details amounting to many millions of pounds without a glance at the written report on his table. Robert G. Ingersoll, that great jurist and brilliant orator, would attend a trial lasting many days without taking notes. Yet in his speeches to the jury, which sometimes lasted many hours, he never forgot or overlooked any point of the opposition. And so I could go on. Scott, Milton, Shakespeare, Washington, Clay, Webster, all of them were noted for their powers of memory. In fact, it may be stated that all men who have attained a prominent place among men have possessed a retentive and accurate memory. So we can see that, as an asset in practical life, whether one's ambition be literary, artistic, scientific, or simply the transfer of dollars from someone's pocket to one's own, as a practical asset, the power of memory is of the highest conceivable value. A good memory will give you an incalculable advantage over others, an advantage that no other mental qualification can balance. Memory training is not difficult. The mind is like potter's clay, it is easily molded, and there is no direction in which development is so easy as in the memory department. Even a few days' practice along the lines I am about to suggest will generally make a noticeable difference, and 2 or 3 months of conscientious training will often suffice to metamorphose a poor, weak, inaccurate memory into one that is tenacious and reliable. The nature of memory. In the introductory article of this series, I promised you that I would not be theoretical or descriptive, but would make these chapters purely practical. Now, I intend to keep my word, but in order to make what follows more intelligible and useful, it will be well here just to pause for a moment and make a few brief statements as to the nature of memory. In the first place, may I say at once that, in reality, there is no such thing as memory. This sounds very much like old-fashioned Irish bull, but it is no more than a statement of sober fact. There is no memory. There are only memories. When I say this, I am not simply juggling terms. The difference is important and fundamental. What I mean is this: memory is not, as we were taught many years ago, a faculty of the soul, a small section of the brain that must develop on its own. Not at all. Memory is merely a term used to describe the way certain acts or thoughts tend to remain in the mind. And each act or thought has its own little memory. Some acts or thoughts we remember with ease, others with difficulty, if at all. If someone were to describe to me the details of a case of insanity, symptoms, history, treatment, I would remember it for a long time, because as a physician, I am interested in psychiatry. But although a day or two ago, I listened patiently to a long account of the Wall Street adventures of an acquaintance of mine, I am quite sure that I could not give an intelligent account of it, because I know little and am less interested in such matters. Similarly, some people have a good memory for names, but cannot remember faces. Others can remember dates, but have no ability to remember names, and so on. The point is this: we remember best the things that interest us most, with which we are most familiar. The small memory of any act or thought may remain in the mind or not. Whether it is remembered or not depends mainly on how much attention we paid to that act or thought at the time it occurred. Therefore, if we wish to have good power of memory, if we wish to have a large number of clear and vivid recollections, all under our instantaneous control, it is essential that we give to what we wish to remember strict attention and careful study. And this is really the great secret of what is called good memory. In other words, a memory is simply a permanence, a recurrence of a perception, and that memory is clear and complete just in proportion as the perception was clear and complete. If, in introducing myself to a stranger, I scarcely look at his face and pay little or no attention to the name, I am not likely to remember either the man or the name. If, on the other hand, I look at him closely and pay attention to the name, I am likely to remember him perhaps for years. Myself, I am frequently introduced to 25 or 30 strangers in the course of an evening, and I am usually able afterwards to remember all or nearly all of their names and faces. This is but the result of a habit of attention to the subject. Now then, on the basis of the principle we have just discussed, we can formulate our first rule for the development of memory. Study the object you wish to remember in all its phases, in all its peculiarities, in all its relations. For the moment, put all other thoughts out of your mind. Make the object a part of you, and you will never forget it. I say object, but I mean of course anything, fact, figure, idea, principle or plan, to all of which the same rule applies. So much for the rule, but you would like to know exactly how to apply this rule to practical development. Well, one of the best ways I know of is as follows. You are walking down the street. A carriage passes by at which you have cast a casual glance. When you have passed, ask yourself about it. What kind of carriage was it? A landau, a buggy, a brougham, or what? What color were the wheels? Did they have rubber tires? How many horses were there? What color were they? The coachman, white or black? The livery, if there was one? How many occupants, men or women? How were they dressed? Do you remember all their faces so that if you saw them again you would recognize them? And so on. When you have done this conscientiously on a dozen occasions, you will be surprised and delighted at the improvement in your ability both to perceive and to remember. For, as I cannot reiterate too often, the two, perception and memory, are practically one. Well, after going through the carriage and getting all the educational benefit you can out of the experience, you will come to a shop window, the window of a toy store, let's say. Don't stop to look at the window. That will only confuse you. Take a look and walk past it. Then ask yourself what you saw in the window. If possible, have a notebook and pencil, and write down each item as you remember it. This is the method employed by the famous conjurer Robert Houdin, a method by which he trained his memory and that of his young son to the point that they were able to remember over 30,000 questions and answers, which formed the code for his famous second sight act. Another valuable method of training the memory consists in establishing as a rule that every night, before or after going to bed, the events of the day should be reviewed in detail. This was the method employed by the great Edward Thurlow, Lord High Chancellor of Great Britain. At first his memory was so poor that he was unable to remember what he had had for breakfast. In time, however, he developed one of the most remarkable memories on record. I know of several cases in which this method has proved to be of great use. Another very simple and convenient, but at the same time very useful, method of cultivating the power of memory is the following. Take some interesting book, such as a historical work or some attractive novel. Read a paragraph slowly and attentively. Then close the book and repeat aloud the contents of the section you have just read. Don't try to repeat the passage word for word. Stick to conveying the meaning as you remember it. It doesn't matter whether you repeat the author's words or your own. After your first attempt, which will probably not be a resounding success, reread the paragraph and make a second effort to remember and express its general meaning. When you have learned this paragraph fairly well, move on to the next one and so on, until you reach the last paragraph on the page. Then take that page as homework and go through it all. After practicing in this way on each paragraph and on each page until the end of the chapter, take the chapter as a whole and repeat it as completely and accurately as you can. This sounds like hard work, and it is at first, but it soon becomes interesting, especially when you begin to discover that, although at first you were unable to give a clear idea of a paragraph you had just read, you are soon able to remember and clearly express the meaning of a whole chapter without great effort or difficulty. This exercise trains not only the memory, but also the perceptions, the will, and the faculties of expression. As far as I know, it was invented by Henry Clay in his early days as a farmer, and he often cited it as the method which had contributed most to develop his prodigious memory and splendid oratorical ability. A valuable variant of the above exercise is to write at length rather than attempt to express in spoken words what is remembered of the paragraph, page, or chapter. For those who desire a further development, a development of the power of expression in writing as well as speaking, I suggest that you practice this exercise by speaking and writing out your recollections of the passage. When you have gone through a book in this way, speaking certain passages and writing others, you will not only know that book in a way that few people ever know, but you will have developed additional powers of attention, willpower, memory, and expression, which will be to you a surprise and a delight. The pictorial faculty. One of the chief secrets of memory is to develop the ability to recall before the mind an image of the desired object, a vivid recollection of its appearance. When I was a schoolboy, I found that it was of no use to me to study either the spelling lesson or the geography lesson. All I needed was to slowly run my eye over the list of spelling words and look at the map of the particular section we were studying. After that, I could have before me a clear picture of whatever word was called for, or whatever section of the map covered our lesson. In questioning musicians who are able to play long passages from memory on the piano or violin, I find that in most cases They remember what the music page looks like and follow the notes as if they had the actual page in front of them. This power of visualizing memories has developed in some people to a surprising degree. The mnemosinic achievements of the Houdins and Magliabechi are referred to above, as well as of other prodigies such as the mathematical marvel Zera Colburn and his prototype Jacques Inaudy. The memory feats of these depend largely, in some cases entirely, on the faculty of visualization. And what is the best method of developing this power of visual memory? There are several very simple and valuable ones. First, try the following. Write in clear handwriting a list of words in column form. The list should contain at first no more than 5 or 6 words. Later it can be expanded to 20 or even 30. Now put your 6-word list in front of you and look at it for a moment. Do not stare or strain your eyes. Don't try to remember the words and yet. This is the moment of observation, of forgetting on the photographic plate of the mind a clear memory image of the list of words. After a moment of staring, cover the paper and try to remember exactly what the words were and what they looked like. You may find it difficult at first. Soon you will find it easy to remember 6. Remember the words, moving both up and down the column. Then gradually increase the number until you can remember at least 25. A useful variation of this exercise is to use figures instead of words, placing them at first in the form of a square of 4 figures, and calling out each one as you remember its position. Again, as soon as you find 4 easy, increase the number of figures by 2 until you can retain, after a single glance, a clear picture of 36 or more figures. I knew a 12-year-old boy who was able to remember 64 figures, a square 8 figures up and 8 across. If asked, he could say the first line of figures forward, the third line of figures backward, the line of units downward, and so on. In other words, this boy could see in his mind's eye a mental image of those 64 figures that was absolutely as clear as the original had been to the physical eye. I might add that the boy I refer to was by no means exceptional, except that he had taken an interest in the tricks I taught him and his companions. They are all now men of remarkable memory. The same method can be varied in other ways. For example, figures can be substituted for letters, or the words can be arranged in groups, say 12 in groups of 3 each, and the exercise consists in remembering not only the word, but its position in relation to the other words. The exercises to develop memory can be multiplied indefinitely. However, those just mentioned are more than enough if properly practiced. The union achieves everything. Sophocles. I have only to occupy myself with this or that to flood my soul with memories. Madame de Luzy. The whole art of mental training is based on the fact that any action executed at first with conscious effort becomes in time subconscious and habitual. Thompson J. Hudson. Inside the secret chambers of the brain, thoughts lie strung together by many mystical chains. Awaken but one, and lo, what legions arise, each stamps his image while the other dies. Cowper. Chapter 4. Association of Ideas. Of all the operations of the mind, that which most directly leads to mental preparation is the power of associating or grouping ideas. The man or woman in whom the power of association is well developed has a mind that may be likened to a vast skein of threads. Each thread represents an idea, and of these thread ideas, all that are related are grouped together like many threads tied in a knot, so that if you touch one of the thread ideas, you are instantly in communication with the whole group. When the ideas are grouped or associated in this orderly manner, any thought that comes to mind will instantly suggest a large number of related thoughts. This means an active, efficient, and often brilliant mind. Now let us understand at once that what is commonly called education, that is, a mere knowledge of facts, however extensive, does not necessarily confer the power to associate or group ideas in such a way that they are readily available for speaking, writing, or thinking. Indeed, I have known men of great erudition who could not speak well, who could not write well, who could not even think well. A well-stored mind, that is mere scholarship, though it can only be acquired by an individual with a good memory, does not necessarily imply the power of association. He who possesses an unusual power of associating ideas is always interesting, often brilliant. His ideas are, as I have said, like knotted threads. Every idea suggested to him evokes in his mind many related ideas. In the mind of a merely learned man, for example, the mention of the word horse will arouse few, if any, mental images. In the mind of the person who has the power of association, however, the idea horse awakens a great number of interesting thoughts. There is the horse so magnificently described in the biblical poem Job. There is the famous Bucephalus horse, the war steed of Alexander the Great, which only he could ride. The person with a great power of association remembers also the wonderful Kantara horse, ridden by Gautama, the Buddha. Then he thinks of the horse of Darius, who, neighing at the critical moment, caused his master to be elected king of Persia, Darius the Great. He recalls the story of the great wooden horse, inside which the Greek soldiers were smuggled into Troy until the fall of that city. And finally, the man with trained powers of association will be able to tell you something of the interesting history of the horse, both before and since it was first tamed and ridden many thousands of years ago by Melesias, king of Thessaly, and so on with any other subject you propose to him. In the mind of such a person, every idea is intimately associated with many other more or less related ideas, and, although his actual store of information is small, his mental images are so closely connected and so quickly remembered that the practice of science and technology is so important to him. In the mind of such a person, each idea is intimately associated with many other more or less related ideas, and although his actual stock of information may be small, his mental images are so closely connected and so quickly remembered that the practical power and usefulness of his mind are greater than in the case of another person with a larger stock of knowledge and a lower power of association. Another great advantage of a well-developed power of association is that it almost prevents forgetfulness. As I have explained in the chapter on memory training, what we fully understand we do not forget. Now, the complete understanding of any idea is simply the result of a process of making that idea the center of a mass of associations. If you had to leave your boat in a stream with a very swift current, you would tie the boat to the shore, not just with one rope, but with several ropes strung at different points on each side of the stream. And the more ropes you tie to the boat and in more directions they extend, the less likely your boat will be to escape, and the more easily you will be able to retrieve it at will. The same principle applies to ideas. Every associative relation is like a little thread which ties a particular idea to another idea, and when we tie that particular idea to many other ideas, we are assured, first, that we shall not forget it, and second, that when any of the ideas with which we have associated the new idea come to mind, the new idea will be immediately attracted to mind. All this being true, we shall be prepared to appreciate the following important statement. It is necessary to have in the mind a large number of ideas. This can only be done by perception and memory, but it is equally necessary that the ideas and memories in the mind be so associated or grouped together that one idea will instantly call up many other related ideas, and this can only be done by developing the power of association. How associations are made. And here the practical question arises, how can I train my mind so that the ideas it contains are closely associated each with many others? In attempting to give an intelligible answer to this question, it will first be necessary to discuss briefly something of the process by which associations are formed in the mind. Someone has said, "Thoughts are things." Now this statement is utterly meaningless unless we have a clear idea of what is meant by the term thing. But let us imagine for a moment that thing is something concrete, common, and physical, like a brick, an ordinary building brick. For a thought can be considered an object, a thing, just as a brick can be studied as an object, a thing. Now, in order to make associations around anything, we must first have a clear idea of that thing. So we must begin by studying our brick, by analyzing it. We will discover that the brick has shape, color, dimensions, length, width, thickness, weight, hardness, roughness, certain utilities and possibilities, history, monetary value, and so on. This process of determining the peculiar qualities of the object or idea is called analysis, and analysis is the first essential step in the formation of associations. For it must be understood that most of the ideas associated with any particular object are based not on that object as a whole, but on some quality or qualities of the object. Having analyzed our brick, we can take some of its qualities and, on that basis, establish associations between the brick and other objects or ideas. If we take its shape, we will see that it resembles a wooden paving stone, a book, or a cigar box. If we take the usual color of brick red, we will observe that it resembles terracotta, the building material, which is a shade often seen in wall coverings and carpets, and is also found in the tile stains often used on the roofs of farmhouses. As to the uses of brick, we find that brick can be associated with granite, marble and other building materials, cobblestones, wood pavers, concrete, and various other substances used for paving, and so on. Now, in all this we have gone through 4 distinct processes of reasoning, and without these 4 processes, there could be no association between ideas. First, we analyzed our brick. Then we enlarged our ideas about it, trying here and there until we found certain objects that could be associated with the brick. Finally, we observed that all the other objects we think of are either similar to the brick in some particular respect, or completely different from it in all respects. We may call these processes extension, similarity, and improbability. Thus, these 4 processes of reasoning analysis, extension, similarity, and improbability must be carried out in order to make complete and valuable associations. In the example just given, I chose a brick as the object, because the mere fact that it was a simple, prosaic, commonplace object made my explanation clearer. However, the same process, the same treatment, can and in fact should be applied to other more complicated ideas. First, we analyze the object from all points of view and in all its details and particularities. If it is a concrete object, we study all its qualities, as we did in the case of the brick. If it is an idea, we carefully consider all its phases. Then we trace all its relations with other ideas, observing how it is similar to or different from them. Then we have gone through the 4 processes: analysis, extension, similarity, and dissimilarity. I will give you an example that illustrates this interesting and important method. Not long ago, I was one of the guests in a country house. One evening, when several of us were sitting on the porch, the little daughter of our hostess came up to me with a plate containing some fine apples and said, "Would you like an apple, doctor?" "My dear, that is a dangerous question to ask a man," said I. "Do you not know that all sin and sinfulness is a sinful thing? Don't you know that all the sin and misery in the world came because once a woman asked a man to take an apple, and because he took it?" And the little girl laughed and said, "Oh, I know, you mean the apple that Adam took from Eve." Clever girl. My observation was made without any conscious effort of the mind, without any deliberate effort or action of the will. It was completely subconscious and effortless. I then entertained myself by searching for exactly what my mind had done when the little girl asked that question. And this is what happened. Analysis, girl, offer, apple. From this analysis, I selected the idea apple and based my extension on it. First, I thought of the old adage, tender as the apple of the eye. Then, in quick succession, memories came to mind of the apple that William Tell is said to have shot off his son's head, the apples of gold in pitchers of silver mentioned in the Bible, the apple of Sodom, the fruit of the other tree, which is outwardly beautiful but filled with a kind of ash, which is why it is often used as a symbol of disappointment, the apples of the field of Hesperia, said to be guarded by the 4 mystical sisters, the Hesperides, the apple for which Paris ran his race. All these ideas, found by extension of the original apple idea, were appropriate, but none seemed to fit. Then the story of Eve and her offering of the apple to Adam came to mind. This fit the occasion exactly, and hence the answer. Here too the processes can easily be followed: analysis, expansion, search for similarities or resemblances, and discarding of less appropriate or different ideas. And don't forget that, in a mind that is even fairly well trained, these images emerge incredibly quickly. I know that in my own mind, as in the case just cited, I often come up with 6 or 7 images, and select the one that seems appropriate to mention in the few seconds that normally elapse between an observation and the response to it. In a previous paragraph, I told you that the proper association of ideas practically ensured the power of memory. Let me now try to give you some notion of how this principle of mental activity may be utilized. Let us take a simple example. Epictetus says, "My mind to me is a kingdom." Now, in the first place, we consider this splendid expression until we fully understand and appreciate it. That is fine, but it is not enough. We want to own this phrase, to make it part of our mental stock, so that we can use it at appropriate times in public speaking, writing, or conversation. How do we do that? Well, we actually have 4 ideas in the quote: the mind, a kingdom, contentment, implied, and the personality of the man, Epictetus, who wrote the phrase. Let's first learn something about Epictetus. Let us analyze his character and put a mental image of him in the midst of a network of associations that will make that image of Epictetus ours forever. We find the following points of association: slave, free, great philosopher, blameless life, desterrated, friend of Hadrian and Marcus Aurelius. So we can associate the image of Epictetus with the following ideas: slaves who were great men, great philosophers who were banished, men of humble origin who became friends of kings, Hadrian and Marcus Aurelius. Any of these will almost certainly suggest to us the idea, the mental image of Epictetus. Let us now return to Epictetus's phrase. The 3 ideas, kingdom, mind, contentment, should be considered for a moment in this way. Kingdom, a place of vast expanse, unlimited resources, unlimited possibilities, infinite powers, much to explore, much to conquer. And for Epictetus, his mind was like a kingdom, and he was content. After the idea of a kingdom of great extent, take up the thought of the mind and its possibilities. Meditate upon this until you see how, to a man of intellect, the mind is really a realm more interesting and wonderful than any physical country could ever be. Then reflect on the notion of contentment in spite of humble circumstances. Associate it with the idea of Thoreau, of Puran Das, of Diogenes, of Gautama, and of Jesus of Nazareth, all of whom were content to live simply, finding their kingdom in mind and soul. "My kingdom is not of this world," said Jesus. Henceforth, any one of these ideas may suggest to us the epigram we are studying, for all of them are now united by the network of associations we have constructed. Now, to work out in this way all the many things that one wants to remember and have instantly at hand seems, of course, very hard work. Fortunately, however, such a method of forming associations, of putting ideas together in bundles or clusters, as it were, is only necessary until the habit has been formed. Then the matter develops automatically, of its own accord. The conscious action becomes unconscious. It is a beneficent law of the mind, and of the body too, for that matter, that any act, after it has been repeated a certain number of times, tends to become automatic, to do by itself, without any sense of effort, sometimes even without our knowledge. A few months of careful effort will in practically every case develop such a habit of associating suitable ideas that the student will possess, without further care or exercise, this supreme achievement of the mind, the power of association. It requires both care and attention to form any desirable habit, whether of mind or body. But once the habit is formed, no further care or attention is needed. Learning to write, for example, forming the letters, combining them into words, elaborating the words into sentences and paragraphs, the paragraphs into pages, all take time, several years. However, once thoroughly learned, as in the case of a trained writer, the practice of writing requires no special care or effort. The same is true of association. Few people have it to any great extent. In most, ideas are separate, isolated. Cardinal Newman says of some navigators that they are now in Europe, now in Asia. They see visions of great cities and wild regions. They are in the markets of commerce or the southern islands. They behold Pompey's column or the Andes, and nothing they meet with leads them forward or backward to any idea beyond themselves. Nothing has any relation Nothing has a history or a promise. All this means, in a word, that these men have no power of association. To arrange our ideas in clusters or groups, we must for a time give special attention to the matter. As an aid to study along this line, I may recommend the following exercises, which have proved in my own personal experience and in that of others advised by me, of the greatest possible value. Take any object you wish: a rose, a pencil, a chair, a wheel, a knife. Once you have selected the object, write a list of its peculiarities. Let's say you have taken a knife, an ordinary table knife. Now describe its shape, color, size, weight, material, and indicate its peculiarities: hard, cold, sharp, heavy, dull, elastic. Once you have written this list of descriptive points, take them one by one and think about what other objects have the same quality. For example, in terms of material, the knife, being made of steel with an ivory handle, resembles all steel cutlery and steel machinery, differing from them not in material, but perhaps in shape and degree of tempering. The ivory handle suggests a large number of items made of that material. The knife edge suggests lancets, swords, scissors, etc., and may also be applied figuratively as to the nature of a comment. His words were like a dagger thrust into his soul, or the effect of a glance, an eye like a bayonet thrust into mine, and so on. This treatment of the object knife, if done exhaustively, will prove to be a very valuable exercise. 3 or 4 hours devoted to it will be time well spent. It is not that you are particularly interested in the subject of the knife, its analysis or its relations, but that, by doing the exercises with any object, you are getting into the habit of treating all subjects in the same analytical way. When you have treated 20 different objects according to this method, you will have made great progress in acquiring the invaluable achievement of associating ideas. Chapter 5. Imagination and how to cultivate it. Mind can create its own substance and its own planets. The universe to man is but a projection of his own inner consciousness. Kant. Of all the faculties of the mind, imagination is the most picturesque and in many respects the most interesting. Without it, the world would be barren. Not only would there be no pictures, no music, no books, but there would be no houses, no bridges, no ocean greyhounds, no great enterprises. Nothing, in fact, for everything that man has made has been first conceived in the imagination before it was born in reality. We cannot think that a person lacks the power of imagination, for that is impossible. But many people, I am sorry to say, are very deficient in imagination, and this lack of imagination alone is enough to make them commonplace, uninteresting, and of little use or importance in the world. A man or woman may lack imagination, and yet be honest, upright, industrious, and conscientious. But to such a man or woman, the higher rewards of life are hopelessly unattainable. He may be an excellent bookkeeper, but never an accountant, a skillful typist, but never a secretary, a faithful stockboy, but never a salesman. The bookkeeper, the secretary, and the salesman must have imagination. Of course, when it comes to any real creative work, painting, sculpture, musical composition, literature, the power of imagination, highly trained, refined, bold, and vivid, is the great essential. The creators of famous masterpieces have lacked, in some cases, everything else except this: imagination. Some of the great artists have lived all their lives in misery and want. Some have been ignorant, some have been crass, some have been immoral, some have been eccentric, some have been almost or completely insane. But all have had one thing in common: a superb imagination. In no respect, I believe, do men differ so much as in the power and activity of their imaginative faculty. Hundreds of men and women have walked and sat in the old country cemetery, and no one had observed anything there that was especially interesting or picturesque. But one day, there came to the cemetery a man with a great imagination, a poet. He saw more than grass and trees and gravestones, and he gave to the world the most perfect poem in the English language. His name was Thomas Gray, and the poem was the famous Elegy in a Country Churchyard. Thousands of people had seen an apple fall from a tree to the ground. But one day, a man with a great imagination saw such an ordinary thing. His imagination took hold of it, and he proposed Newton's theory of the law of gravitation, one of the most important achievements in the entire history of human thought. Another man sees his mother's kettle boiling. He watches the steam expand and lifts the lid. His great imagination starts from this homely detail and gives the world the steam engine. Napoleon, poor, dark, hungry, roaming the streets of Paris in search of work, dreams of making all of Europe a vast empire, his empire. And he almost succeeds. And so we could go on indefinitely. Perhaps it is enough to repeat that the masters of the world have always possessed a fine and daring imagination, and that without great powers of imagination, no great or important work, whatever its nature, can be accomplished. Imagination is easily cultivated. Perhaps you feel that your own imagination does not always serve you as well as it should. Perhaps you are wishing it were better, that you could produce in it such an improvement as would enable you to create some good and worthy thing in the world. In that case, I am glad to be able to tell you that, of all the faculties of the mind, none can be so easily, conveniently, and rapidly cultivated as the imagination. And I may observe that, as in the case of other faculties, the means taken to cultivate the imagination will necessarily at the same time train and strengthen the mentality in all other directions. In the first place, it must be understood that the act of imagining, of bringing images to mind, is not a separate function of the mentality, but is closely interwoven with, and in part consists, in fact, of several other mental faculties. Therefore, in developing the power of imagination, we must first speak of these other faculties which are actually part of it. If we study an act of imagination, we will see that first of all, we must have some material for our image. For most people, the act of imagination means the creation of something totally new. They think that the picture created by the painter, the poet, the novelist, is new in all its details. Now this is a radical mistake. The artist does not create anything that is totally new, and this for a very good reason. There is not and never will be anything entirely new. Now, as in the days of Solomon, there is nothing new under the sun. You can imagine, for example, a green horse with purple wings. You will say, surely that is a completely new idea. I say no, it is simply a new combination of four very old and common ideas: a horse, a pair of wings, and the two colors, green and purple. And so, in all creations, however new they may seem, only the combination is new. The combined materials are ancient, very often, as human thought itself. We see, then, that the first raw material of the imagination is our perceptions, the things we have seen, heard, felt, smelled, and tasted. And it hardly seems necessary to state that the better service we have received from our senses and perceptions, the clearer and more vivid will be our power to bring before the mind composite images of those things. The first task, then, of anyone who wishes to develop his power of imagination is to educate the senses. But imagination requires more than mere perception. Things perceived must be remembered. A thing we have forgotten, lost from the conscious mind, cannot be used as material for an act of imagination. And then the things perceived and remembered must have been grouped and associated in clusters, so that when one wishes to imagine a certain image, he will have a large amount of material in his mind from which to select the materials for that image. To cultivate the power of imagination, then, we must begin by educating perception, memory, and association. For, and this is my definition of imagination, imagination is nothing more than a combination of perception, memory, and association with initiative, will. This is by no means a textbook, but it will give you a clear idea of the process, as textbooks would probably not do it in such a short time. Some practical exercises. Let me say here that you exercise your imagination all the time, during all your waking hours. You imagine thousands of things every day. Everything you do, all the people you meet, everything you say, all that is in the imagination before it becomes realities. Your imagination gets a lot of exercise, but it's not the right exercise. Mental images are not clear and vivid. How can you make them so? Demand it of yourself. And this brings me to your first practical exercise. Get a good, lively novel, something action-packed and as close to the here and now as possible. Get comfortable and start reading. When you get to the end of the first paragraph, Stop and picture before your mind a clear image of what has been expressed or described. Was it a scene? Picture it: mountains, sea, farm, urban residence, cold, warm, rainy, bright. Try to make it as vivid as it would be if you were contemplating the scene. That's what the writer of the story did. Otherwise, you wouldn't be reading it. In the next paragraph, the scene changes. Something is added to the image. Notice this. Take your time. It's an exercise. Then comes a person, let's say a man. Notice him. Is he tall, short, dark, light, attractive, repellent? How is he dressed? Force yourself to imagine every detail, and so on for a chapter. By then you will have had enough, but if you have acted conscientiously according to my advice, you will feel an understanding, an interest, and a sympathy for that book and its characters that will surprise you. When you have read a dozen chapters in this way, you will have proved to yourself in many ways that your imagination, and in fact all your mental faculties, have been markedly improved. Moreover, you will know for the first time the true pleasure of reading. This is the kind of reading that Emerson had in mind when he said, "There is such a thing as creative reading, as well as creative writing." Another method by which you can cultivate the faculty of imagining is the following. Take 15 or 20 minutes at the end of the day and make a detailed review of your most important events. Take plenty of time, supply every detail, see and hear again all that was said and done. Examine each episode critically. What mistakes did you make? How could you have handled the situation more smoothly, advantageously, and diplomatically? How would you act again in similar circumstances? In this exercise, try first to see, to really, clearly, and vividly see each event, person, action, detail of each episode. Second, in imagining how you could have acted yourself and others, be careful not to criticize other people's actions. Try to feel that whatever went wrong, you yourself, if you had possessed sufficient will, sympathy, delicacy, intelligence, and control, could have fixed it. Do not try to finish all the events of the day. That would be impossible. When 15 or 20 minutes have passed, stop. This is the method of Pythagoras, who devoted his entire evening to meditate on the events of the day. To develop the power of the auditory imagination, the following methods are useful. Remember the words and melody of a well-known song, performed by a good singer, and imagine how it sounds. Listen to the lyrics, note the quality of the voice and accompaniment. 3 or 4 songs or 3 or 4 repetitions of the same song are enough for once. Call to mind one by one the various sounds of the countryside and listen to them in your imagination. The buzzing of the bees, the sound of the wind, the rustling of the leaves, the cries of the various birds, the mooing of the cattle and other noises peculiar to country life. Another valuable exercise is the following. Recall some experience from your past that at the time made a strong impression on you. Review it in all its details, slowly and carefully. Consider its causes, the means by which it could have been avoided, the external influences that affected it, the consequences of the event for you and others. What influence has it had on your life since then? Has it been good? Bad? Why? If good, can't the same experience be repeated? If it is bad, how can it be avoided? This method should be followed with various experiences. As it is easy to understand, the exercise develops much more than the imagination. It teaches reason, judgment, self-control, and that intelligent and thoughtful care of self, which is the middle ground between brutal selfishness and basic self-denial. Another useful exercise is the following. Recall some attractive landscape you have seen. Draw it from memory. Suppose it is a stream in the mountains. Remember the rocks on the bank, the trees with their low branches, the cows knee-deep in the water at midday. It brings to mind the twittering of birds in the foliage, the hoarse cawing of crows in the pines not far away, the occasional mooing of a cow in the adjoining field. Hear the laughter of children as they plunge at dusk into the cool, still waters of the nearby mill pond. Smell again with imagination the scent of the earth, the trees, the wildflowers, the freshly cut hay in the nearby meadow. Walk through it all thoroughly and purposefully. Do not omit any detail. Next, begin the creative phase of imagination. First, paint a picture in your mind. Let's say a landscape. a view of a high mountain on the right, a large tree on the left, between the two a hillside covered with greenery, beyond it a lake over a blue sky, under which the setting sun hangs. Add all the details that I do not have space to enumerate. Compose many pictures like this, spending time on every little bush, rock or cloud. Unless you make the picture vivid and complete, you will lose the real benefit of the exercise. Every picture ever painted has been worked out in this way in the artist's imagination before it was put on canvas. Next, add action to the picture. On the lake is a small sailboat with a merry crew. How many are there? What do they look like? How are they dressed, etc.? Suddenly, a squall comes up. The boat capsizes. Another boat leaves the shore and rescues the unfortunate ones, and so on. One of the most interesting and valuable exercises for the imagination is the following. You are reading a fiction book and have reached, say, the end of the 3rd chapter. Now sit down and write with your imagination a continuation of the story from the point where you stopped reading. Who will marry whom? How will the villain be punished? What will become of the adventuress? Write another continuation at the end of the 4th chapter. Do the same at the end of the 5th, 8th, and 10th chapters. Now, in this exercise, although incidental literary practice is very valuable, the main thing is to train the imagination. Therefore, you must imagine more than you write, setting out the rest of the story as you imagine it in brief and simple terms, but long enough to be clear. Take plenty of time. Better to come up with a good, clever sequel in 5 hours than to spend twice that time doing a rushed, blurry, incomplete job. Finally, come up with a complete story. Imagine your hero and, if you want, a heroine. Develop your situation and bring things to a logical end. The best training for the mind, for all other faculties, as well as for the imagination, is not to put the story down on paper until it is complete in thought. Some of the most successful story writers follow this method and never put the story down on paper until the imagination has fully worked it out. The best plan is to first block out in the imagination the general plot of the story. Then go over it again and again, elaborating the situations and adding details until the whole story seems like an event from your own personal experience. Then write it down, making no special attempt at literary form, but taking care that the description and details are clear and accurate. You can then make a second copy or even a third if you wish, and with each writing try to get a clearer and clearer mental picture of the characters, scenes and events that make up your story. A few hours a week spent in the study of the lines I have here sketched will do wonders, not only in cultivating the power of the imagination, but in developing all the desirable qualities of the mind. Chapter 6. How to Concentrate Attention. Attention makes genius. Wilmot. Genius is nothing but continued attention. Attention is a sure mark of superior genius. Lord Chesterfield. Attention is the stuff of which memory is made. If I have made any improvement in the sciences, it is due more to patient attention than to anything else. Concentration of attention is one of the master keys of power. Without it, nothing great or significant can be accomplished. The most perfect perceptions, the most retentive memory, the boldest and most picturesque imagination, without concentration, they can do nothing. The principle of concentration can be well illustrated by a physical comparison. Suppose we take a soccer weighing 4 ounces and propel it through the air by means of the powder charge generally used for a projectile weighing 4 ounces. What effect will the impact of the ball have? None. But suppose we concentrate the 4 ounces of weight in a lead sphere less than half an inch in diameter and apply the same propulsive force to it. What will happen then? The difference between the soccer and the lead bullet is the difference between diffusion and concentration, the difference between harmless and deadly impact. The same is true in the world of thought. Some people's thoughts are like a football, big, expanded by the wind of words, slow-moving, ineffective. Others' thoughts are like bullets, concentrated, fast, direct, going straight down the center, without pause or hindrance. "This is the only thing I do," said that profound philosopher, Paul of Tarsus. And if we study the history of the master spirits of the world, we will see that this has been their policy. the coarse butcher who pushed Charles I from the throne and established a form of government based on moral principles instead of special rights, the pale little French lawyer who, in the hope of establishing his wild dream of democracy, had the flower of French aristocracy carried up the staircase of Dr. Guillotine. Guillotine, the ignorant coppersmith who gave the world perhaps the greatest allegory in profane literature. The Corsican adventurer, plebeian and lowly, who made himself master of the world. All of them had for their motto the idea of concentration. This is what I do. Now, what is meant by concentration of attention, or as it is sometimes said, by power of attention? You see, in the kind of language I am using for you, we do not try to express things with scientific precision, because that means the use not only of many, many words, but the introduction of many new and, to us, unnecessary words. Therefore, for our purpose, we may use the terms concentration, power of attention, concentration of attention, as if they meant the same thing as they really mean. What is concentration? In a word, concentration may be defined as the state of mind in which all the energies of the individual, both physical and mental, are concentrated on what he is doing or thinking. All actions and all thoughts unrelated to what he is doing or thinking are kept out of mind, and all his forces are concentrated on the task at hand. He who can do this has concentration, has the power of attention. He who has not this power must acquire it before he can hope to do or be anything admirable or worthy in the world. Anyone who has performed any difficult feat of strength, such as lifting a heavy weight, bodybuilding himself on the horizontal bar, or trying to make a track record in the 100 yards or the 220, will realize how great a factor in these muscular performances is the mere fact of concentration. In these, as in many other physical feats such as jumping, marksmanship, weight throwing, etc., the slightest deviation of the mind from the work being performed is absolutely destructive to success. In acrobatic work, such as flying trapeze and flying rings, as well as in juggling and balancing, the same is true. Acrobatic jugglers and gymnasts are always masters of the art of attention, of concentration applied to their special feats. Now, concentration is largely a negative process. It depends as much on what you don't do as on what you do. Take an example. You sit down to write a difficult letter. The streetcar whizzes by with its villainous bang bang. Suddenly you remember that you should have gone into town to buy the book your wife wanted. But there's the letter. You go back to it. You write 1 or 2 more lines and suddenly you hear the excited barking of little Fido, the Scottish terrier. You walk over to the window and look out. Nothing happens, just another not-so-Scottish terrier across the street. You reread a few lines of your letter and start again. You don't quite know what to say. Your eyes roam the room. Ah yes, that suit that needs pressing. You take care of it. Then you go back to your letter, and so on and so forth. Half an hour has passed and the letter has just begun. Now this is a good example of lack of concentration, of a wandering mind. And such a habit of thought is an absolute obstacle to any achievement that is useful to oneself or to the world at large. And how to overcome this tendency? By what means can we obtain the power to put all the faculties of the mind at the service of the task of the moment, without allowing any of our thoughts or attention to be diverted in other directions? It is very simple. Simple but not easy at first. Just refuse to let the mind wander. Be the master of your mind, of yourself. Remember what Milton says, "He that is master of himself is king of men." But of course, you will want more specific instructions than this. It is easy to say, concentrate, but you need to know exactly how to concentrate. Remembering that attention is nothing more than the act of applying the mind, the whole mind, to the task at hand, you will understand that the faithful practice of the various exercises advised in the preceding chapters of this series cannot but be of great value as aids to the development of the power of attention. Every effort of the mind, whether to perceive, remember, associate, imagine, or judge, must necessarily involve a concentration of the faculties of the mind on that particular act, whatever it may be. In the first place, therefore, I can assure you that the practices I have advised you, if you have faithfully followed them, will have greatly increased your power of attention. In fact, such assurance on my part is superfluous, for if you have exercised as I have directed, you yourself will have already noticed a marked change in this direction, as well as in others. Do not allow yourself to overlook the fact that whatever mental act you are engaged in, the act of attention is necessarily involved. There is no faculty of the mind in which you have so many opportunities to exercise yourself. Therefore, the first exercise I advise you is to go carefully through all the methods I have detailed in the chapters on perception, memory, association, imagination, and judgment, making a special effort while performing them not to allow the mind to be diverted for a moment from the task at hand. This alone, if done persistently and conscientiously, will assure you a high degree of this splendid intellectual achievement. One of the best methods I know of for anyone who wishes to begin at the beginning and learn to concentrate attention is as follows. Select some task which, though simple, requires precision and close attention. An addition or multiplication is well suited for this purpose. Now devote yourself to this, resolving that, until it is finished and verified, you will not allow the mind to assume, or at any rate to hold, any other idea or image. While you are adding or multiplying the figures, you will suddenly discover that some other idea comes into your mind. The ringing of a bell, a fire or an ambulance, a shout in the street, a fight or a fugitive, a thought about the landlady, your tailor, your shopkeeper. This is where you must perform the essential act of concentration, of trained attention. Close the door to these external thoughts. Go back to your work. For a time, at any rate, you cannot prevent the intrusion of extraneous thoughts. You can, however, resolutely refuse to allow them to remain in the mind. At first they will come, insistently again and again knocking at the door of your consciousness. Let me in, they cry. Don't worry about those stupid figures. I am more interesting. I am more important to you. You must, you should, you have to think of me. Let me in. But no, says the trained mind. I only do one thing at a time. I can only think of one object at a time, and if I let you into my mind, I can do you and my task no justice. Avaunt. But the lurkers do not retreat so easily. They come back and come back with incredible persistence. They knock at the door of your mind. They insist on intruding, and every once in a while they gain entry. So, don't worry or fret about them. Don't let them bother or excite you. Don't get discouraged. Just bring your attention back to the original subject of thought. As Dr. William James, professor of psychology at Harvard, said, "The effort of attention is the essential phenomenon of the will." Another exercise to focus attention is to simply count. Count 100 by starting with 2 and adding 3 each time, e.g. 2, 5, 8, 8, 11, 14, etc. Or, starting with 2, add 6, 7, 9, 13 or 17 each time, e.g. 2, 8, 14, 20, etc. 2, 9, 16, 26, 23, 30, etc. 2, 11, 20, 29, 38, etc. Or starting at 100, count down, subtracting 3, 6, 7, 9, 9, 11, 13, 17 or 19 each time, e.g. 100, 97, 94, 91, etc. This may all seem very simple, but you will find that, unless you already have a very highly developed power of attention, you will not at first be able to complete the 100 in any of these exercises without entering into the mind of wandering, extraneous thoughts. The moment you are able to add or subtract freely in this way without any wandering of attention, you may congratulate yourself on having acquired to an unusual degree the power of concentrated attention. For the following exercise, you will need about 3 dozen large blank cards. The best size is about 3 by 5 inches. On one of these cards, write a 4-digit number, for example 4,357. On others, write 4 figures arranged in a square, such as 47, and underneath 93. Then on several cards write 6 figures, such as 457, under which you place 236, or figures such as 47, 52, and 96, one under the other. Other cards should contain from 7 to 10 figures in a single column. Prepare a dozen of these cards. Now to use them. Shuffle the cards, face down. Take one, take a quick glance at its face, then repeat aloud the numbers you saw first in the order they were written, i.e. 4,357, then backwards 7,534. Or, to take another letter, repeat 47, 52, 96 in the order in which they appear. Then backwards 96, 52, 47, then down the units column 7, 2, 6, then up the tens column 9, 5, 4, and so on. After a few hours of practice like this, you will begin to know the numbers on each card by heart. This, while good in a way, makes the exercise less valuable as concentration training, so you will need to prepare another set. In the second set, put a larger number of figures on each card, say something like 947, 853, 201, one below the other, forming a square of 9 figures, or 94, 78, 53, 20, 16 in a column, or a line of 12 or 15 single figures, arranged as for an example in addition. After a period of practice with these cards, you will again discover that you are learning to remember numbers from previous looks rather than from the last look. Then it is time to make another set. This time, make the squares of the numbers even larger. Make them into squares like these: 4,702, 3,895, 6,374, 9,765, etc. Or make collections of numbers like 470, 238, 956, etc., making a list of perhaps 5 or 6 lines of 3 digits each. In my own experience in this line, I have known students who could remember with unerring fidelity a square of figures consisting of 64 figures arranged in a square, such as 48,964,325, 93,842,739, etc. It seems incredible, but it is absolutely true that after a while, it is as easy to remember a mental image of 64 figures as of 12 or 16. Perhaps it is an improvement on the practice described above to have the help of another person to shuffle the cards and show one for a fleeting second. If you can get someone to work with you, it is a good plan to have the helper read a few lines of prose, say about 20 words at first, which you will then repeat from memory. You can also say aloud a list of words or figures that you will listen to and repeat later. And now the last and most important exercise I have to suggest, and I may say right here that if practiced persistently and conscientiously, you will acquire the power of concentration to a greater degree and in a shorter time than by all other methods combined. This exercise, like most great and important things, is also very simple. It is as follows. Make every detail a work of art. Think it through. It means that you do everything, the most trivial acts, with strict and exclusive attention. Are you lacing up your boots? There's a way that little homely act can be done more quickly, easily and satisfactorily than any other way. Standing, walking, dressing, writing, shaking hands, shaving, handling a knife and fork, opening a book. All these and a million other trivial acts, if done consciously and attentively, provide a training in concentration that is absolutely impossible to obtain in any other way. When asked by some inquisitive journalist the secret of his success, Sunset Cox replied, "I think it's my attention to detail. I take pride in how I wrap a paper package. This is the true spirit. Pride in success. Make every detail a work of art. And then, the profit. You develop not only the power of concentration, you develop perception, memory, association, imagination, will. And this is one of the most satisfying results of the practice of mental training. By developing any one faculty, you develop others at the same time. As for concentration, when it is trained, all the other faculties of the mind are trained at the same time." Chapter 7. Psychophysical Development. The human body is an entity. In ordinary conversation, we refer to the individual as being composed of 3 different elements: the physical, the mental, and the spiritual. In reality, however, these 3 are merely different phases of one form of activity. The spirit is the great omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, and eternal thing that animates both mind and body. Mind and body, in turn, are but representations of the action of spirit. In the perfectly organized individual, spirit, mind, and body would act together perfectly without friction, without effort, without the need for any special training. There are, in fact, a few exceptional cases in which spirit, mind, and body act with a certain degree of harmony, in which the pure impersonal spirit, the Sat, the Atman, as the Hindu sages call it, acts in such a way that it dominates to a great extent the thoughts, feelings, and movements of the individual. Such persons we call geniuses, the shining ones of the ages. This intimate interaction of body, mind, and spirit is the mystical union so often mentioned in the writings of the ancient Egyptian, Hindu, Chinese, and Hebrew philosophers. Once this harmonious action is achieved, the individual is immediately in possession of health, strength, energy, beauty, and expressiveness. As Browning writes in Paracelsus, "There is an intimate center in all of us, where truth dwells in fullness, and knowing rather consists in opening a way by which the imprisoned splendor may escape, than in bringing in a light that is supposed to be outside." A wiser teacher than Browning said, "Seek ye first the kingdom of heaven and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you." The kingdom of heaven, as Jesus uses it in this and other instances, undoubtedly refers to this mystical union between spirit, mind, and body. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Two phases of human action. In all human action, there are two distinct phases, thought and movement. Thoughts lie hidden in the grey caverns of the brain. They are potential, latent. Movements are physical, evident. Every thought, every impulse, every emotion has its ellipsis in some action of the muscles, and when such a thought, impulse, or emotion is perfectly expressed in muscular activity, we have the ideal human being. In connection with this, it may be appropriate to introduce two brief quotations from the writings of Professor William James of Harvard College. He says, "There is no more valuable precept in moral education than this. If we wish to conquer undesirable emotional tendencies in ourselves, we must assiduously, and in the first cold-blooded instance, go through the external motions of those contrary dispositions which we prefer to cultivate. Soften the frown, lighten the eyes, contract the dorsal rather than the ventral aspect of the body, speak in a major tone, make the compliment genial, and your heart will be frigid indeed if it does not gradually thaw." And elsewhere the same author has said, "There is no reception without reaction, no impression without correlative expression. This is the great maxim which the teacher must never forget. An impression which merely reaches the eyes or ears of the pupil and which in no way modifies the active life is a wasted impression. It is physiologically incomplete. It leaves behind it no fruit in the form of acquired capacity. Even as a mere impression, it fails to produce its proper effect on the memory. For to remain fully among the acquisitions of the latter faculty, it must be forged in the whole cycle of our operations. It is its motor consequences that entrench it. Some effect, due to it in the form of activity, must return to the mind in the form of the sensation of having acted, and connect with the impression. The most lasting impressions, in fact, are those on account of which we speak or act, or else become inwardly convulsed. Of all the many evil effects of what we call civilization, the most fulminating is that its general influence consists in breaking the close interrelation between thought and movement. To live the conventional life of the well-educated man or woman, one is forced to constantly stifle and deny desires, impulses, and thoughts, and such denial leads inevitably to injury of mind and body. Relationship between mind and body. Mental activity simply means certain chemical and mechanical changes occurring in nervous matter. These changes occur not only in the nervous matter of the brain, but also in the nerves which cause muscular action. This is a very broad subject, and it is impossible, within the limits of this paper, to elucidate it. It may be said, however, that every emotion and every thought has its corresponding output through the motor nerves, that every emotion and every thought has a muscular image which is peculiar to itself. Now, if the muscles are free and flexible, the thought which occupies the higher nerve centers will be translated by a certain position of the muscles. In other words, a person marked by such a peculiarity will be expressive and interesting. All the great singers, actors, and orators, all those who are most successful on the stage, in politics or in society, have been distinguished by this peculiar expressiveness. To be expressive requires several things. The body must be erect. The joints and hinges of the body, as has been explained in previous chapters, must each be in its place. The habit of keeping the muscles in a state of relaxation and receptivity must have been acquired. Among the many exercises which the author has employed for the purpose of developing this power are the few given below. A careful study and practice of these exercises cannot fail to result in an increase in general expressiveness, health, and personality. Exercise 1. Anticipation, pleasurable expectation. Imagine a person coming toward you whom you very much want to see. You would naturally lean forward to greet him, extending one or both hands and smiling. Now, keeping this idea, this mental image, before the mind, allow the flexible body to show it in gesture, facial expression, and a few words of greeting spoken aloud. Exactly what you do is not of the slightest importance. Simply hold the thought so intensely that for the moment you accept the imagined situation as real and let the body go. This exercise can be varied infinitely by changing the image, but always imagining a situation that produces a feeling of pleasant anticipation. Exercise 2. Horror. Imagine that you are looking at a dangerous animal, a snake if you are a man, if you are a woman, a mouse, from which you cannot escape. Naturally, you recoil in horror. As in the previous exercise, in this one you must completely forget about the body, let it go, and put all your attention on the imagined situation. In this exercise, as in the previous one, you can invent any situation that induces the thought of horror. Exercise 3. Joy. Imagine some situation that awakens in you a state of joy and yield the body to the feeling. Exercise 4. Guilt. Imagine that you have committed a crime, for example, a robbery. Imagine that you are brought before a judge and you plead guilty and ask for leniency. Let this thought permeate mind and body, showing by gestures and attitude your appreciation for the situation. Exercise 5. Accusation. Imagine that someone has committed a crime against you, that you are facing him in court. Make your accusation, if necessary, in words, adopting at the same time the attitude appropriate to this emotional state. Exercise 6. Depression. Imagine circumstances such as to produce in you a feeling of depression and surrender the body to it. These exercises, though they may seem unusual, have powerful and far-reaching results. Anyone can find this to be true in a week of faithful practice. It should be understood, however, that they cannot be properly practiced until the body has been made upright and completely flexible by persevering practice of the exercises described in the preceding chapters. As for mental imagery, literature and poetry offer many suggestions. David before Absalom's bier, Hero before the corpse of Leander, Socrates drinking the cup of hemlock, Luther on his way to Worms, Hamlet before the ghost of his father, Robinson Crusoe when he discovers the footprint in the sand, Rip Van Winkle awakening from his long sleep, Mark Antony in his speech to the Romans, Regulus separating from his wife and children. These and many other scenes offer vivid dramatic situations. In all this work, the great point is to subordinate the body, to make the body obedient, flexible, acquiescent, and interpretative of the mind. Those who are interested in any form of expressive art, dramatic, lyrical, or scenic, will find these simple exercises valuable. Chapter 8. The Lost Arts of Childhood. Except ye be converted and become children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 3. For of such is the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 19:14. The more deeply the man of science studies the sayings attributed to Jesus, the seer of Judea, the more deeply he is impressed not only by the brilliant intellect and marvelous oratory of Jesus, but by his marvelous insight into subjects which in his time were unknown even to the most lucid thinkers of antiquity. In the history of the race, 2,000 years is not a long time, and before the beginning of the Christian era, much more had been accomplished in the lines of philosophical, physical, and cosmological research than, with all our boasted scholarship, has been done since. Indeed, some of our most startling discoveries are but corroborations of the knowledge of the Brahmins, the Chinese, the Phoenicians, and other ancient peoples who lived thousands of years before the supposed appearance of Jesus of Nazareth. How much of this ancient knowledge Jesus possessed is impossible to say, probably most, if not all of it. One thing is certain, some things he knew and said which, as far as we know, were entirely original and iconoclastic. And one of these things, entirely new then, and almost entirely new now for that matter, was to the effect that in the study of children we should find the key to the kingdom of heaven. Now, as I have explained elsewhere in these sermons from a scientist, the kingdom of heaven, or the kingdom of God, is not a place where good people go when they die. The kingdom of heaven is a state of mind, of spirit, that state in which the spirit, therefore the mind, therefore the body, are all three in harmony with the great Oversoul and with his laws. For us who are adults, who for 3, 4, or 5 decades have been guilty of the thousand crimes, physical, mental, spiritual, incidental to ordinary life for us, it is necessary to be reborn, to be radically changed in spirit, therefore in mind and body, before we can enter the kingdom of heaven, the physical realm of peace, rest, and power. Thus, Jesus said to the disciples, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven." By which he meant exactly the same as when he said to Nicodemus, "Except a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God." Of the many millions who have read, with much attention and deep reverence, the words I have quoted, few, if any, have seen the clear, profound, and practical wisdom of Jesus' statement that only the man, the woman, who became as a little child, could enter the kingdom of peace and power. And now, let us analyze a little. What is there in the child that we should emulate? What characteristics does the child have, not possessed by the adult, that when developed in the adult, will give him or her entrance into the kingdom of God? Note, it is not said that children are in the kingdom of heaven, nor can they be. They lack the real knowledge, the experience, the poise. But it is in experience, the hard and bitter experience, that develops poise and power, that man loses the simplicity, confidence, and tenderness of childhood. It is when, in addition to his adult faculties, he attains the lost arts and faculties of childhood, that he enters the kingdom of heaven. What are the lost arts of childhood? Let us first consider some of the physical characteristics of normal childhood. The healthy child is remarkable for his erect body, his upturned face, his clear and powerful voice, the ease and grace of his movements, his wonderful endurance. That these are among the normal faculties of the average healthy child may be determined by a few minutes' close observation in any playground. A moment's reflection will show how rare such powers are among adults. The healthy child is erect. Therefore the chest is high and expanded, the body is carried as an erect spine, and the breathing is slow and deep. These are the only conditions under which the normal tone of voice can be reproduced when singing or speaking. The erect carriage means that the joints and muscles of the body are in their normal mechanical relationship to each other. Thus, in the normal child, we have movements that are at once rapid, graceful, and economical, so economical of vital force that the child's endurance has become a proverb. Children romp for hours without tiring, but an adult who joins in their games usually tires in 10 or 15 minutes. Why? Because the child moves well and the adult does not move well, because bodily movement is one of the lost arts of childhood, and then the ability to rest. The tired child lies down on the sofa or on the floor and rests. The tired adult, on the other hand, often tosses and turns, smokes and worries because he cannot sleep. Then his sleep, when it comes, is not restful, and he wakes up after 8 or more hours as fatigued as when he went to bed. Few adults have retained from childhood the power to rest. For the power to rest is another of the lost arts of childhood, and he who would enter the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of peace, must be a master in the difficult art of rest. The world is full of men and women whose most ardent ambition is to succeed in some art, music, painting, acting, writing, and of the multitude who toil laboriously, tirelessly at their chosen task, how few succeed. But study the young children. Watch them as they play when they think they are unobserved. They are playing house, school, church, and so on. On no stage in the world will you find a performance so true, so finished, so perfect an exposition of the actor's conception of his role. From a purely technical point of view, the dramatic work of a healthy and intelligent child is beyond criticism. It is simply perfect. And then there are the moral and spiritual qualities of the child. By nature, he is absolutely truthful, both in the sense of seeing the truth and speaking it, until fear and bad example seduce him into lying. Michelet, that profound and tender philosopher, has said, "No consecrated absurdity of mankind would have survived a generation if man had not silenced the objection of the child." Do you remember the first lies you were told? How strange it seemed that people you may have loved and feared and adored with the pure, white-hot intensity of the child, how strange that they would do that. Soon, however, you learned to do it yourself, learned the fatal usefulness, the convenience of the lie. And so the angel with the flaming sword took you away from the Eden of unconquerable innocence, and only after many years of wandering in waste places, only by being born again, will you be able to re-enter Eden, the kingdom of heaven. And with the truthfulness of childhood, simplicity, kindness, democracy, independence, all these are among the lost faculties of childhood, and all these we must attain if we are to possess the higher faculties of body, mind, and spirit. Except ye become as little children, no true power, physical, artistic, intellectual, or spiritual, is possible. To him or her who will simply accept the teaching, the kingdom is at hand, and a little child shall lead them. The truly great of the earth are not the most polished by conventional educational methods. Moreover, they are often the lonely and the abandoned. They have starved in garrets and dreamed in hovels. From miserable prison cells they have sent forth breathing thoughts. Under the silent stars, they have conceived thoughts as lofty as the stars themselves. They are those who, through great tribulations, have been born again and who, like little children, have entered the realm of peace, wisdom, love, and power, the mystic kingdom of heaven.
We ask for a couple little things in exchange. Support our authors by subscribing to our channel, our videos. Like and join us as we explore the magic of storytelling. Enjoy our audiobooks.